what we're going to start by doing, I think, is finishing off this skyline so that we can then turn our attention to the sky. So we're just going to finish off. We've got some roofs and things on this side here, and this is again going to be an exercise in creativity because this image is wider than a sheet of A4. It's longer along the top than a sheet of A4 would be. But I really like this sort of church spire. It's that sort of slightly Moorish, slightly sort of Byzantine Eastern influence that you see in Venice. I think it's great with that little onion dome and stuff. So I'd like to include that. So I think maybe we can pop some roofs in over here and then sneakily shove that church spire so that it's just in the side of our picture like that. So that's what I'm going to do now. And so to begin, I think I'm going to want to start painting some of these houses that are along on the other bank of the Grand Canal. And they're in shade, aren't they? Because we always keep an eye on where the light is coming from. And they're very much in shade. So I think it might be an idea, first of all, to get together a sort of color that can get the color of these cream colored houses when they're in shadow. So, but first of all, we'll want to maybe put down some light cream, so that we have the color of the bits at the side that get hit by the sun. So we can just put some of that down. And for that, I think we used a mixture of white and yellow ochre. So I'm going to take my mid-sized brush. I'm using a number 8. Anything of a similar size will do. And I'm just going to start by loading in some white, having woken my brush up. And then I'm going to start dropping in some yellow ochre.
Sorry, Felix, could you just say that again? I'm a bit distracted, sorry.
Yes, no worries. I'm going to start by dropping some white into my palette, and then I think it's called yellow ochre, the one just below it, the one just below the white. Just to get the color of that fairly bright cream where we've got the bits where the sun is hitting the houses on the right side of our picture. Again, we don't need too much of this color because we've put down most of the light cream of these houses. So I'm just going to drop in a little bit of yellow ochre. Not too much, of course, because it'll get that cream color fairly quickly. Just drop a few bits in and wash my brush off. Maybe just dab it dry on my kitchen towel just to make sure there's not too much water getting introduced, and then just muddle those together. I'm fairly happy with that color. And I think I'm just going to pop in some areas roughly where I see them on the picture. So let's have one here. Backwards and forwards motion, no pressure at all, just to make sure that we get a nice even coat. Maybe they'll be a bit bigger than those areas will eventually be, because we can paint over them with a darker color.
Are we doing the bit sort of just behind the bridge? Is that the bit we're doing?
That's right, just behind, that's what I said, we're just behind the bridge and to the right of it, just where you can see there are these bits of houses in sunlight. I think it'd be good to pick those out first.
Okay.
Just these bits here, that's what I'm doing.
Okay.
Although, of course, as I've said, I'm going to cheat and I'm going to shift this magnificent spire here over onto about there so that it can fit into our picture. Speaking of cheating, I think I'd like to get some of these red rooftops in here, but again, there are all these fiddly bits, and I think that these white sort of gables would frankly be more trouble than they're worth and wouldn't add too much to this riverscape. So I'm just going to add in some red rooftops along here, I think, just so that we can crack on with our skyline. Those red rooftops as they come over the Rialto itself, over the bridge. I think I can do that with my mid-sized brush. I'm going to be using the same, I think it's called Sienna in your palettes, this same color, just to get that. And I'm working the bristles in quite a bit because I want this to be fairly thick. We want a fairly distinctive wet on dry, clear shape to emerge. Great thing is, of course, that this is the fiddly bit, all these houses and things. What we're going to move on to when we do our water and our sky will be a lot sort of freer and a lot less fiddly. And now there's a sort of border, isn't there? But I'm just going to acknowledge that I can paint that on at a later date because it's a darker color. I'm just going to start putting in some of that red color, following the pitched sort of shape of the roof, starting off with the outline. There we go. And I think it sort of extends across to here, doesn't it? So just a nice gentle slope upwards, just like that. And then it pitches down like that. So I'm going to extend it across. Maybe make that a little bit sharper. And then just finish up.
What colour are you using there, Felix?
I think it's called burnt sienna, or sienna at any rate. It's this one here. Just there, just this one. Although, of course, you know, I'm using it because I quite like the shade and I think it's convenient that it's there on our palette. But if you'd like to maybe make a slightly brighter red up, then of course, absolutely free to do that. It's just a color that I like to use for this. And then just with slightly more dilute paint, backwards and forwards, just filling that shape in. And just harrying the paint a bit there, just to blend it all in a bit. And then there's some other rooftops here, aren't there? And so I think I'm going to do some rooftops modeled on those, just intersecting. Well, there's a white house there. But I think I can just extend a rooftop into this orange house here. I think I can just do that, or near enough. So that's what I'm going to do now. Again, taking my cue from it, making sure the rooftops look like those in the picture, but not worrying about copying them exactly. So there's one here. I'm stopping just there so that we can paint in the walls of our house. Nice view of my head there, apologies. And then maybe I'll just put one in like this. And then I'm going to wash my brush off. And now I'm going to have a think about this spire here, because I really like that and I'd like to include that. I think we can start off with just the basic color, the lightest color first, which is the color of this sort of reddish orange as the light hits this right-hand side. So we can paint in two sections of that there, and then get some detailing around these white pediments and things, and then do that dome on top. As ever, I'm going to be a bit creative, and I think it might be fun to use a slightly brighter shade of red, maybe a fairly dilute one. So I might use this shade of red here. Although if you'd like to maybe use this orange shade or mix up an orange, then that's up to you. But I'm going to use that. I'm going to use it fairly dilute so that we get a color that sort of is similar to this. Because I think it'd be quite nice if there were 2 points of pinkish red that were sort of communing over the Grand Canal like that. And I don't know about you, but I've not got a huge amount of room on towards the top half of my paper. So I might just, again, cheekily shrink some of the sections of this spire. Just start laying down that red color. There we go. That's going to be the sort of base of that spire, I think. And there's going to be a roof there, so I'm just going to leave that like that. That's pretty thick, so I think I might just take some of that paint off. You've probably been much more sensible than me, but I'm just going to use a very slightly wet brush just to draw some of that paint off, just so that we get a slightly lighter color. It's a bit more similar to the color of that house there. Again, maybe I'll shove some of the pigment to the left-hand side where we've got the shadow. And carrying on with this same color that I'm using, I'm going to skip out a bit because there's this sort of white pediment, isn't there? And so we want to avoid that. I might just put a little bit of red there and then carry on with the drum of the tower just there. Just leaving that space for that band as well. That sort of runs round the edge. And then I'm just going to paint the drum of the tower up. Again, not too high. Might be squashing my tower just a little bit to make it fit more prettily. I'm going to fill that in. Now, I'm aware that I'm painting in a slightly parallel universe to the rest of you because there's no black in this image. So to me, the dome on top looks like a sort of blue, a sort of a dark blue sort of color. If with the black it looks darker and you'd like to use a darker color, then please do. But I think I'm going to use one of my darker blues here. I think I might use this one here just above the sienna color. I'm going to use a fairly dilute version of that just to get that onion shape. An OG, I think, is the architectural term for it, an OG'd dome. It reminds me how this tower, however distantly, of my own parish church back where I'm from, because that's a very weirdly designed church tower. It's got battlements, but on the four corners there are little OG'd onion domelets like that, like little iced gems on the top of the church tower. And no one's quite sure why it was designed like that. It's very flat country around. You can see it for miles, and it does look, I think, a little bit Venetian. So with that in mind, I'm going to take up some fairly dilute dark blue. And start getting in this section on top. First of all, getting in the outline, that funny sort of chubby pear-shaped OG rising to the top here. And then maybe I'll just sort of have a bit of a clipping off just there. And then I'll fill that in. Maybe I'll shove some of that extra pigment towards the bottom, which is going to end up being darker anyway. And then there's another OG on top, isn't there? Sort of like this onion is wearing an onion hat. So I'm going to do that, maybe in my burnt sienna color. Again, fairly thick, because I want to get a fairly controlled line. Good amount of pigment. Not too much water. And then I'm just going to trace the outline of this little hat. Just like that. And it's all quite elaborate, but it means that now we've got a rough sense of what our skyline is going to look like. And now maybe just to finish off my skyline, I think I'll take maybe some battleship grey, and I'll just add some ledges to these little houses here, similar to the ledges that we've got up here. Just a matter of doing two fairly thin lines, and I might use a smaller brush for that. I might use a size 4 or something of a similar size, just to give them a little bit of definition on the top. And I'm going to make sure that the bottom line, the line that's right on the wall of colour, is a bit thicker, just so that we've got a suggestion of shadow there. Again, fairly thick paint. We want a very nice controlled line. Stopping just there. Maybe a hint of some texture just like that. Curve it round. Then a very thin line. Just on top. Again, just curving that round. Maybe I'll add a bit of a boundary between the two. Just sort of chased like that. And there are, of course, other bits and pieces here. There are other sort of pediments and roofs and things, but personally looking at them, I think they look a bit messy. I mean, I can't tell, is that part of this building? Is it a building behind? What's this balcony part of? What's this balustrade part of? They're a bit messy, and I don't think they add too much to make the picture look that nice. So I'm going to say personally, I wouldn't mind just keeping our skyline like this and just starting work now on our sky. Hello, Carol. Carol, we're just finishing off the top of our skyline, just ready to start doing the sky. You can paint along. You're free to paint along if you like, but this session is being recorded, so if you'd rather just watch and then paint along with the recording, you're welcome to do that as well.
Okay.
Up to you.
I'll see how I get on. I'm afraid I didn't get the link this week, and I didn't realise the class was about to start. So
Oh, I'm sorry to hear that. Well, it is completely up to you. We're just carrying on with our Venice. So if everyone's, are we ready to start on the sky itself, or would you like just a minute longer on our skyline?
No, ready to start.
Ready to start? Okay.
Yeah, ready.
So for this, we're gonna use our old friend wet on wet technique for the sky, and I think this is great fun because we've got quite a nice sky. It's a relatively clear blue sky, but there are some nice clouds in here, and those If you remember us doing our wet on wet technique for those cloisters a couple of weeks ago, we really found that it's very easy to create sort of cloud-like fuzzy shapes with wet on wet, and that's exactly what we're going to be doing here. We're going to start off by getting ourselves a nice sky color. Well, sorry, we're going to start off by wetting very slightly the area that we're going to be using. And then we're going to get a nice sky blue and start painting in. And we're going to be painting in a darker color around the top and maybe with a little less paint, excuse me, on the bottom. But all the while, we're going to paint around the shapes that are going to be our clouds. And for this, I'm going to take this Whack and Great Decorator's brush, the 3/4 inch. I'm going to just wake it up and then load it with my clean water from my clean water jar. And we're not going to want to get our paper too wet. We don't want to have a sort of flat sheen. We want it to be, we want the grain, the texture of the paper to still be visible, so that it's just got a film on it, but nothing much more than that. So just very quick, rough strokes, going all the way down to our roofs, but not muddying them. And I crane down and I get my face quite low, and then I look from a low vantage point at my paper, and then you can see the way that the light reflects off it, and you can see where you've covered. And just make sure that the speckles and grain of the paper is visible. So that we've got a light film of water, but not too much. Not being too careful about going right up to the roofs, but near as. Some quick backwards and forward strokes just to spread that water around. Just so that we've got a nice even layer to work with. Again, checking by craning down at a low angle, just to make sure there's nowhere I've missed. And then we're going to want to take a nice sky color and maybe a number 8 brush. And I think that this color here, this blue just above leaf green, is quite nice for that. So I'm going to take some onto my brush. And then I'm just going to start working that on. I'm just going to have a think about where I'd like my clouds to be, and just avoid hitting those areas directly, just slowly painting around them. And again, the clouds can be similar to the ones that we see, but they don't have to be exactly modeled on them. No one's going to know. Fairly dilute colour. Getting these billowing cloud shapes, fairly rough to begin with. Just making sure that I know where roughly my clouds are going to sit, and we can then work a bit more on their edges. And maybe if we find that our brush strokes are becoming a bit too sort of firm, it might be an idea just to re-wet the area of the paper that we're working with a brush that's just loaded with water. So I'm going to chuck some colour down and then do that. Nice brush loaded with water. Just get a quick there. And just get that nice feathered outline. Re-wetting areas that I want to work with, because they might have had a bit of time to dry by now. Oh. Then once I'm happy that I've got my colour, my cloud shapes down, I think I'm just going to just keep adding colour. And as I do so, I'm going to add more colour to the top, a darker top of the sky coming to a lighter bottom of the sky, avoiding my clouds. And maybe if some of them have some slightly hard edges, I can just get a wet brush and just feather that edge a little bit. But I'm just going to start off filling in the colour of my big old Venetian sky. I'm not too worried about going right up to this OG here. There's of course a cross on top of this, but that's black, so I think we can leave that to do with a fine brush once we're happy that we've got our sky complete. Remembering that if we ever get brush strokes visible, we can just harry the paint around it a little bit just to wake it up and just to get it moving, because watercolor paint loves to socialize given half the chance. So if you wake it up and move it about a bit, then it'll start blending. You can start moving it about.
Oh. Almost done.
Sure.
That's all right. Oh, yeah.
I think the scientific name for these clouds is altocumulus, high cumulus clouds, fair weather clouds. I think the idea is that those form because of hot air carrying moisture upwards. And so they form over land in the morning, in a hot morning, because land will give out that heat very easily, which is why sailors could find their way to land by looking for cumulus clouds when you're out sailing in the Caribbean or wherever, and you see a little cumulus cloud perched on the horizon, you just know that it's perched above an island that's gotten warmer faster than the surrounding sea. Venice is sort of an island, isn't it? Or it's a bit of land in a lagoon. So maybe the mariners of a few hundred years ago, as they were sailing to Venice, would see these puffy little cumulus and think, "Oh, brilliant! I'm near Venice. I'm near home."
Felix, I have to say mine just looks a terrible mess.
Well, yours and mine both. But the great thing is, as I've said, with watercolor, nothing is permanent. So, what is there a problem in particular? What do you mean?
It's just really blotchy and sort of, I don't know, it doesn't look quite as good as yours. I think maybe, I'm not sure really. The paper also seems to be coming up slightly, maybe it's too wet.
Maybe it's something to do with that. I mean, maybe you could try weighting it down. Is it the problem that the water is flowing in directions that you don't want it to?
Yeah, it seems to be sticking to the paper and I can't move it. I think that's the problem.
Sticking to the paper. What's sticking to the paper?
Well, the sort of pigment of the colour.
Okay, well, so there are a couple of ways. If you want to get it off, you can just use some wet kitchen towel or a brush that's just very slightly wet,
That's a good idea, yeah.
and then just sort of draw it up like a sponge.
Yes, that's helping actually. Yeah. That's
Great. Now, once I've got this sort of feel in, I'm just going to start making sure that well, firstly, that the top of the sky is lighter. Is darker. I'm going to grab some of the pigment from the bottom and push it up. Maybe using a bit more pressure than I would do normally. So I'm keen to push and pull this pigment around, make it do my bidding. Again, if we do see bits of texture like that where we're tearing up the paper slightly, we can just let it rest for a little bit because we don't want to work the paper too much. So while that's happening, I might just get a brush that's very slightly wet, and I might just feather the edges of some of these clouds because they have slightly sharp edges. And it'd be quite nice just to harry those a bit, make those a little bit more cloudy. And maybe I'll add some water on top, and then use a little bit of my paint just to get a bit of a more fluffy texture. And then just move that pigment around once it's done its job. These backwards and forward strokes just helping to really blend in, pull the pigment down. And again, the great thing is, as we've said, if there are rough edges, because I can definitely see some rough edges in my sky, and I don't know whether you can in yours, we can just get the basic sort of form of it out, and then we can always come back to it later. So now that we've got our sky in place, our Venetian sky, I'm going to have another look at the bottom of our picture. And we said before that we've got all this jumble of people along the seafront, along the seashore, and we can do that in a very sort of delicate way. We can do that in the sort of suggestive way that we saw in the Singer Sargent watercolors last week. So I think I might just start by laying down some blocks of color of the same sort of cream color of the houses above this waterfront stuff. And then that's a nice thing for us then to be able to paint on top of. I'll just wait a minute so we're all happy with our sky. Are we ready to move on to the waterfront? Or would we like just another minute just with our skies?
Fine, thank you.
Yes.
Okay. So let's have a look. Let's start with mixing up the sort of colors we'll need. Well, I've already got my sort of cream color from doing this bit over here. So I think I'm going to use that for underneath this house here. And as ever, when we're laying down fairly big blocks of color, I'm going to want to get the rough sort of shape right so that I can paint stuff on top of it. But this is the foundation, so we don't have to be exact. It's just a question of getting down a nice sort of base color. I might need to add some more color to that because that's got a bit weak. But I'm just going to follow the rough shape round just like that. It's going to be a sort of quadrilateral, sort of rough rectangle of color there.
Who was that then? Okay.
Maybe I'll connect some parts of this up. Just like that. And now I think we can have a think about some of these wooden posts here, these mooring posts. And I think that we can do those with one of our brown colours. So for that, I think I'm going to want to get a fairly dilute version of this brown here, just below my sienna. And I'm just going to make some strokes down like this, just to plant some of these mooring posts in the Grand Canal. They start sort of roughly from the height of those umbrellas, don't they? So that's a nice guide. We can just chuck some of those down. Fairly broad strokes. The nice thing is that they're sort of the shape of brush strokes anyway. They're slightly tapering. So we can just do it like that. Making them maybe get a little uneven in height, but ultimately getting a little bit shorter as we get towards the horizon. Maybe a little bit thinner as we get in that direction as well. And the great thing is that these are a real guide for our perspective, because we can see they're running all the way along the waterfront, but they're getting smaller and smaller. And so we can do something similar, just guiding the eye towards the Great Bridge, towards the Rialto. And just following that gentle sort of curve up, bringing the eye upwards like that. Of course, as they get thinner, they also start appearing a little bit closer together as space just gets a little bit compressed. Again, of course, I'm not painting them exactly as I see them. So I think I might have one right here, a really great whacking one, just to emphasize that this is the bit of the picture that's closest to the viewer. And I think that that funny sort of slightly blotchy watercolor texture really works in our favor when we're painting rough wood like these, because the watercolor sort of does our job for us and we get that nice sort of texture almost automatically, it feels like. And once I've done those, I'm just going to rinse my brush off. I think the effect is quite fun because we've started off with these buildings appearing, then a sky has appeared, and then this area of white that was once just a bit of blank paper, well, all of a sudden we're seeing these mooring posts in it, we're seeing a great blue sky above it, we're seeing what's starting to look like Venice, and instead of being a blank bit of paper, hold on a minute, it looks like the glaring absence of water, the glaring absence of the Grand Canal, which is what I think we can work on once we've just established the sort of shape of our shoreline there and on this side as well. And to give ourselves a shoreline, I'm going to, again, cheat very slightly. I always like knowing the structure behind my pictures. Like I said, you know, I like when we did those cloisters, I found it very helpful to know where the main sort of lines fall. And I think a line that's really important here is the line that distinguishes the things on the shore from the things in the water. And so I think we can trace that line, can't we? We can trace where these jetties and things and boats and so on end and where our Grand Canal begins. And so I think I'm going to take my small brush and I'm going to do a fairly unobtrusive line of dark blue just to tell myself this, here be water, and there be land. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take, I think, this blue here, just above the sienna. I believe it's the blue I used for that dome there. Using a small number 4 brush, wet on dry, I'm just going to draw for myself a water line. I'm just going to have a look at the shape that it'll take, and then a very slender line, just as sort of the foundation for things to come. If it does have a little bit of that dry brush quality there, that's not something too bad, because that suggests a sort of foaminess around the water's edge. Just doing this as a nice guide for when we come to do our water. Of course, I'm making sure that all of my posts disappear into the water rather than into the land. Incidentally, you might have seen there's a boat, some sort of launch, that's getting obliterated here. Again, I'm not too worried about that because I think it doesn't add too much to our image. We want it to have a sort of timeless quality about it. And it's nice just to have a clear, sharp sense of where our shoreline is going to be. Then we hit the Rialto here, and our shoreline sort of goes along like this, because the Rialto sort of projects, doesn't it, into the Grand Canal at its base. So I'm going to follow that, just like that. And the other bank is a bit busier, but I think still, as we prepare to do our water, it wouldn't hurt just to add in a line like this. Just following that line round, just so that we can constrain our water when we come to paint it. The waterline sort of dips like this. So we've got those buildings facing onto the Grand Canal, visible underneath the arch of the Rialto Bridge. And now once we're ready, I think what this is really crying out for is the water itself. And since we've got our outline, we know where we're going to be painting that water. And so just when you're ready, I'm going to take back my medium-sized brush, my number 8 for me. Wake that up again. And again, we're going to have a think back to those Singer Sargent watercolors of Venice that we saw last week. And the painting of the water was very rough, wasn't it? It was very imaginative. It was very free. And so we're going to do something similar. So what we're going to do, taking a fairly wet brush, you know, wet but not dripping, we're going to pick a color for our water. I think I quite like the idea of using this color here, but quite dilute.
Sorry, which colour's that, Felix?
I think is it called Midnight Blue? It's one of 2 though, so it's the one that's just above the Sierra.
Okay.
That one there, although of course you can pick another color if you like. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to paint some starting in the middle, just some very free form backwards and forwards strokes like this. Very, very free indeed, and leaving some gaps of white. And the real thing to watch out for here is that the gaps between the strokes, because there can be gaps, should be closer together, smaller gaps as we get further from the bottom. And then as we get closer, we can have slightly larger gaps. I'm just going to do that. I've got the brush held quite horizontal, and I'm just backwards and forwards, looping around from time to time like this. Fairly dilute. Fairly dilute Midnight Blue, I think it's called, just above the Sierra, between Sierra and one of the greens in your palette. I'm just doing these very carefree strokes. And the reason I'm doing it beginning in the middle here like this is because, of course, water reflects, it gives back what's above it. And this stuff right in the middle of our Grand Canal, all that's above it is sky. But that's not the case for example, the left-hand side here. And we can see when we look at our picture that, of course, it reflects back the houses below it. And so we're going to do exactly that. We're going to carry on with our deep blue for the areas of our Grand Canal that are below nothing but sky. Maybe fanning outwards a bit like that. And then we're going to do a similar sort of technique, coming directly down from each of these colours with the colour in question. So I'm going to start, for example, let's start with the pale orange that I've done this house in. Just diagonally opposite from our white here. Take that, fairly dilute. And then those same very free brush strokes, leading with the point of the brush, just to suggest the reflection of this big old house in the water below. And we can maybe paint a bit more in than we would do otherwise, because we're also going to encroach on this a little bit with our blue from the water. Again, it's not coming out too clearly, but I am painting all the way down with this colour. And then we're going to do something similar with the other house colours. And maybe I'll need to mix myself up a bit more of that cream colour. I'll drop some white and some yellow ochre in, just to make up a little bit more of that. Now what we're going to want to do in a little bit is bring in some of the same watercolored strokes to sort of come in and clash with and overlay with these areas of reflected color, because you can see here that it's a sort of mottling, isn't it? We've got all these horizontal strokes of watercolor, blue, sort of coming over and interfering with the reflected color of our houses as the rippled surface of the water reflects different things. But we're going to wait for that to dry first, because watercolor being as sociable as it is, it could ruin some of those fairly hard lines that are good for making that look the way it does. So I think this might be a good point to explore adding a little bit to our waterline. And to do that, I'm going to look at nice bright areas of color that can be picked out. And there are a few sort of umbrellas and things here, aren't there? I think those look quite fun to do. There are a few little hanging bouquets and things, a few other snatches of color. I've looked at the picture itself and I can see that most of these people are in silhouette and most of the tables are in silhouette, but there are odd snatches of light. So we're going to do something similar. Even though they all look like nice pink and purple blobs on my picture, I'm aware that they're all fairly silhouetted on yours. So I might just start off by throwing up a few more umbrellas along the side of the water. And those umbrellas, I really love this bright red. I think it really grabs the eye, really grabs your attention. So I'm going to use this red here, just like we did last week, and put up a few umbrellas. Fairly concentrated. We're going to be going wet on dry. The great thing is as well that this helps with our perspective, because we can see over here umbrellas and they look pretty big. And over here we've got the same sorts of umbrellas, but we can make them look much smaller. So again, we get that illusion of perspective. We get something like the line of bright red umbrellas drawing the eye to the Rialto itself. Again, there are some white umbrellas muddled in there, but I prefer these red ones. So I think maybe I'm going to make them red. Maybe I'll invent an umbrella here as well. Again, just a sort of intermediary, drawing the eye this way. And once we've done that, I think I might just start adding in some of these hanging baskets, some of these flashes of green that we've got, these flowers growing along the side here, for example, little hanging baskets up here, bits of green there. I think those are quite nice. And maybe I'll use one of my darker greens for those. Maybe I'll use, for example, this green here. Using my small brush, number 4 for me, and just chucking those in. sort of feather the edge a little bit, because they're fairly rounded, these sort of shrubs, but obviously there's a little bit of feathering where we've got the leaves. Fairly rounded top to these, and maybe a slightly shaggier bottom, just like that. Again, just inventing some snatches of greenery along the far side here, just to run with this idea that we're seeing similar beachfront to canal front institutions fading into the distance, getting that continuity. We've got some plants that are sort of hanging over railings, haven't we? So maybe I'll do something like that. I'll have suggestions of plants trailing over a flat edge like that. And have them flourishing up. And we can see from our picture the odd railing, the odd edge of a chair. So maybe again with my fine brush, I might just add in some blue railings, just as something for this greenery to be clinging onto. I'm going to use a fairly concentrated, strong blue, the one that we used for our sky, to get those bits of railing. Quite nice where the line of the railing gets interrupted by that greenery coming in. And then maybe I'll have a think about adding in some bits of yellow ochre just to suggest people's faces. Again, we saw in the Singer Sargent, the people didn't really look like people at all when you zoomed in. They looked like a couple of blobs of paint, but they were very nicely placed. So we're going to try and do something similar and just have a few suggestive blobs. Again, in keeping with the rough scale that we've got, maybe there'll be someone here. Maybe we'll just have a face like that. Maybe there'll be someone just visible here. Maybe part of someone's head here. Maybe some smaller areas of highlighted heads just here, getting smaller and smaller. Just building up, going from light to dark, ready to add in all those silhouetted figures, all those chaotic figures by the waterfront. And now, yet again, I feel like I've blinked and our time is about up. I see it's 11:15, and at any minute, if I'm not quick, we'll get unceremoniously booted out. So it may be time to pause there. And I hope very much that you enjoyed today, that we've made a bit more progress on our Venice and we've added some sea and sky above and below our buildings. I don't know about anyone else, but I'm getting much more of a sense that we're in Venice, that we've got a refreshing landscape to look at now. I think that's the end of a second block of 4. Of course, if you'd like to continue, I'll be running another 4. And I think the first of those will be finishing off this picture. But at any rate, just before I let you go, can I ask that you all show me your works in progress? Isn't that lovely? Wow. Those are great clouds. Wow. These are fantastic. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Felix. That was really enjoyable.
Thank you very much.
Well, I'm very glad to hear it. Well, thank you very much for coming and have a lovely week.
Thank you very
Thank
much.
you.
Thank you. Take care.